All right, welcome everybody back to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Owen Campbell, owner of Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona, and with me is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution PT and Fitness in Connecticut and Long Island. How are we doing today, Brian?
Good man, how are you?
I'm
Good
doing
to be back.
okay. I think I have a better mic set up, so I think it's not going to sound like I'm on the other side of the room. Uh,
Nice, nice.
Hopefully
We're
that works
slowly getting
out.
better. This is good. We're practicing making perfect.
Getting your reps in, baby.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so, so today we are having a topic around what an entrepreneur can do in the early stages of growing and starting their business. And the biggest thing, I think, obviously you're one of them, is getting a mentor, finding somebody that they you can bounce ideas off of, you can get some ideas from. I think that this is a really good space to talk about what to look for in a mentor. What are some of the things that you rely on a mentor for, all the way from a few friends who may have done it before, all the way to some professional services. So, I just want to set up for the listeners. That's what we'll be talking about today. If this is something that you think you might need, keep on listening, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, I want to know. I think the first thing when I was thinking about this is why is having a mentor a good thing? I know when I was hiring PTs, first question any new grad PT would say to me is, I need a mentor, I need a mentor, I need a mentor. And sometimes we have one available. Sometimes we would kind of work on coaching in a system, maybe a team approach. Sometimes it's not available. There's only a few people who are at the mountaintop. Do they have enough time for you? So I guess the first question I want to know is why is getting a mentor a good thing or trying to cultivate a relationship that may end up being a mentor? Why is that a good thing?
Yeah, I think there's several different factors into that, right? And I think the first is that you're able to learn faster. So you're able to
Okay.
accelerate the process. So, all of us, we think about coming out of PT school and that new grad that's talked to us. I mean, now we're on the other side of that conversation, Owen, because we're old. But in terms of when we first came out of school, I mean, getting somebody to help teach you and guide you, I think one of the first things that I tried to figure out was how to find a mentor who could teach me certain skills to accelerate my skill set, right?
Yeah.
PT school just took me so far. Now I want to continue to expand what I'm doing. And how do I continue to expand what I'm doing? On the flip side, too, I think what's also key is not a mentor doesn't need to be just a one-on-one relationship. You can learn from courses like continuing education courses. You can learn online. Like, when we were first coming out of college, YouTube was huge. So I mean, now it's like a staple, obviously. But it's one of
Yeah.
those things where we were learning from physical therapists everywhere on the planet because of YouTube. And so you could look up different tests and learn what you wanted to learn and how to accelerate your process. So I think that's a huge piece of it for sure.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about learn faster, I'm thinking about what my strategy was when I was starting out is I actually had a tiered approach to the mentors that I would cultivate, right? So I had a few clinicians that, my God, they're almost ready to retire. They were very old school, high volume orthopedic clinics. They were some of my first CIs, so I could always kind of talk with them about business. And once I got more into it, I really looked at you were one of them, obviously, full disclaimer, right?
Mhm.
But you've been doing it for 8, 9 years as an entrepreneur yourself. Then I actually looked at someone in my market who had done it 3 years prior to me that I actually worked with and was bouncing things off of him, saying, hey, I'm at this stage. What's going on? And he was able to be very helpful for me. And then I also actually a colleague who has started recently as well. So I had kind of three different, in my head, I wanted three different kind of looks at the same problem, and it ended up working pretty well.
Yeah, when I so like we've talked about now with evolution and what we've really changed is we're a hybrid model of insurance based physical therapy, but also a lot of cash based services. What we do,
Yeah.
when I first started, and I'd recommend this to a lot of people, but it's because it's just easier to start. I started as a cash PT, just as a mobile practice, purely out of practicality, right? I mean, the overhead of having insurance based overhead is tough, and the cash flow side of it, right? It's more
Yeah.
lucrative. It's tougher in that scenario.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to like the ability to learn faster, like the first mentor I really had, I remember spending money on learning from that person and getting to know them and learning. And what it did was I remember having the conversation much like this. And like in 30 minutes, he was like, I probably just made you $5,000 in this conversation. And I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? But then I swear to God, using some of the stuff that we talked about, I turned
Mhm.
around and landed a client that I otherwise wouldn't have. And that person paid me probably like $2,000. And so I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I was like, holy shit. I was like, that did just happen. And
Yeah.
so within that time, I had actually signed up with him doing some things. And after that, I started making more money to a point where I don't even think I finished the course that I had done with him because I got busy to the point where like I couldn't do it. And so, what you recognize is you learn faster. And one of the things that I didn't realize was I was like, oh, because I'm so different, like this is why. And the reality is like, that's not why at all. It's like, you just don't know what you're doing yet. And so
Yeah.
if you don't learn how to
Yeah.
do the right things and take the right steps, like, how to use certain language, how to sell yourself, how to, differentiate yourself, how to talk to people and say, this is what I'm going to do for you. That'll be super helpful. Right. Like
Yeah.
that I think is a key component. So that's a big
Yeah.
part of that. It just
And that's
accelerates that speed.
well, and the key point. I have a guy who one of the mentors I was speaking with. I was going to come out at a high dollar amount. I'm an experienced therapist. I have my OCS, blah blah blah, whatever, right? Um, and I sat and had lunch with a guy, and he said, "So, how many people know that you exist?" And
Yeah,
I
man.
was like, I don't know. And he said, "Lower your price, see more people." Go to a gym where there's a lot of people and just hang out there a bunch. And I was like, really? And honestly, it's kickstarted me, man. Like that
Yep.
has been something that I thought, well, I'm going to get this high dollar amount. I'm going to do this. He said, you got to get people who are willing to pay you for a lower dollar amount to then build it back up. And at least so far, it's been working. I'm a lot. I mean, I'm a lot happier. I'm actually seeing people instead of chasing around one guy.
Yeah,
So,
man. And then the
but
thing is,
that could have taken me so long to learn because I could have been stubborn as all heck about I'm worth $200, I'm worth 250, I'm worth 350, whatever it is people pay. That guy's doing it, I can do it. No, little humility, man. And I mean, the guy was killing it, so I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it.
well, and the reality is, if you increase your prices, right, like you're just going to bring down the amount of patients you see, but you
Yeah,
haven't maxed out your time yet. So once you max
yeah,
out your time, the easiest thing to influence is price raising. It's like the
yeah,
easy lever to pull. So it's
yeah,
like, all right, I'm just going to raise the price because I want to have less people. And
yeah,
so it's like when you get to that point, sometimes it's like you raise the price to the point where you get the whoof. That's how
mm,
much it is, and you're like, perfect. I got it in the right spot.
yeah,
So it's like
yeah,
you want as it kind of goes there. So I think that's good. I mean, we talked about this too. The second reason for why it's important to get a mentor is to make less mistakes, right? I,
yeah,
I remember thinking this pipe dream. I remember when I was first, starting my business, I was like, I'm gonna go nice and slow so I never make any mistakes. And what a crock of shit that was, right? Like there's just no way I'm not gonna make certain
Apple
mistakes, right?
Podcast. This is now an explicit
Exactly.
podcast.
So in terms of the mistakes that I've made in the past, like the good news is nothing's cost me to lose my shirt, right? But
Yeah,
the reality is stuff's obviously cost me money. And so the reality is
yeah,
like you're gonna make mistakes that either cost you time or money, in some capacity. So it's just
yeah,
trying to figure out, okay, like how can we minimize those mistakes? But more importantly, how can we learn from those mistakes? And so I think what happens when you learn from a mentor, someone like what you just said, what did he stop you from doing? You're like, I'm gonna put my price here and I'm gonna really command that. And this guy's like,
mhm,
no, I wouldn't do that because here's what's going to happen if you do that. And the mistake's going to be that you're probably going to not really get a lot of clients. And so
mhm,
then it causes frustration, can kind of lead to a little bit of burnout, can lead to like
mhm.
why is this happening? But then here you're hitting these small kind of wins. And so you're like,
Yeah,
sweet, now I'm not chasing one guy. I kind of hitting these wins. And then
yeah,
what happened is as you're hitting them, you're like, all right, now I'm learning this stuff and I've got some money rolling in. I got some cash rolling in. And then
yeah,
at a certain point, you can be like, all right, I want to like raise my price. And you could do
yeah,
that. Right. And
yeah.
so I think that's the key to your point is like it also helps make less mistakes too.
Yeah, I think I agree with the less mistakes part. What do they say? Pay somebody else to learn from their mistakes. With some of
Exactly.
these consulting classes and things like that, you get people who've been there 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. They've been in that side of the business, and my first, actually, this is more clinical. My first CI said to me, "I'm going to show you all the shortcuts. Don't tell your teachers, but in 4 years when you graduate, you're going to really love me for it." And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Dude was right. Dude was absolutely right. There were so many things that I just could get people better a lot quicker than if I were to
Yeah.
just study it up, right? So now I think on the business side of it, I'm taking that same mentality. I'm talking to the guys and gals who've done it. Hey, you've done Instagram marketing. What do you do? Hey, I saw your stuff, and just cold calling them. I've cold called. There's one guy who does golf fitness out of Seattle. It's called Fairway Fitness on Instagram.
Mhm.
And right when I was starting up, I was like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" And he's like, "I just post one thing a day every day." And I mean, he's got like 70,000 followers. He's got, I just texted him the other day saying, "Hey, you got a whole football stadium watching you do a squat."
Yeah, man, it's true. It's true.
But that's something that if I really want to commit to Instagram, I know, okay, you got to do it every single day and suck it up, as opposed to trying to buy ads and all that. So,
For sure. For sure. I think part of it's your point about like kind of like I like associating with the clinical side of it, right? Like,
yeah,
I remember thinking and another it's kind of ties two stories together, but one of the things I think creeps in your mind, especially when you start your own business and do other things, is there's a lot of loved ones that are around you, whether it be your parents or boyfriend,
hmm,
girlfriend, wife, fiance, whoever, you know what I mean? Like there's brother, sister, there's people who's around you that are kind of their intentions are positive, but
hmm,
the comments come off negative, right? Well, are you sure
yeah,
you're doing this right? Well, maybe you should do
yeah,
this, or I don't know what you're. And the
yeah,
mentor can kind of like put you and be like, I've done this before. And that's happened to
yeah,
me a lot, right? Like where
yeah,
someone's been like, well, why this or why that? And so what it can do is it can force you to make decisions. I mean, they talk about this all the time, like in businesses, is that one of the biggest things that people make in business as a mistake is that they listen to people that have never done it before, that are
yeah.
loved ones that are very close to them. It's the number one reason for why people don't start a business is because they're afraid of failure and judgment by loved ones. And so
I
the
could,
thing is,
yes,
right? You can see that, right? And
I
so
could totally see it.
the aspect of that of like, when someone's around me and talking to me about stuff, like because I have people around me that support me in a mentorship and great partners and stuff like that, like all of a sudden when stuff goes a little bit negative with some of my, whoever it is, family, friends, whoever's saying it, and just, well, why
Yeah,
don't you do it this way? Why didn't you try this? Or blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
yeah,
thanks. I'm good. I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, it's like in my
yeah,
head, I'm like, you
yeah,
can get rid of that head trash. And I think that's super helpful. And I think, one of the things that we could, I'm sure that, and our parents were advocates for us and
mm.
complaining, but I know my parents, when it came to picking clinical affiliations, are like, why don't these guys help you find housing? And like, why don't they help you fucking do this? And blah, blah, blah.
They
Right. And
just
I
didn't
was
want
like,
to pay rent.
yeah, and so in my head now, I'm like, now we take students, and I'm like, why would I? Like, I'm gonna teach them for 6 to 12 weeks, and like,
Yeah,
teach them all these things. Like, and I get it, they're not getting paid, but to your point, like what you're paying for in those dues is to accelerate your career skill set wise,
yeah,
right? And so
yeah,
that's the payment that you're doing. There's sacrifice that you have to make to be a better physical therapist and clinician. It's no different when you're starting off, as an entrepreneur in this.
yeah, yeah. It's the time, the time saved with making less mistakes has been really important. And I think for me, the really, it was almost personally, and you've walked through this, so I'm kind of telling you the same thing you already know. You've walked through it with me, but I came from a family where, man, mom was a nurse, dad was a postal worker. There was no entrepreneurship directly around me. I was from a pretty small town too, so I didn't even have friends really whose parents were business owners that I could bounce stuff off of. So I was very fearful, very, ooh, I'm going to lose it, or what's bankruptcy again? Oh, can I really do it? Am I really as good? And I think that for me, it came down to everything else was exhausted. The corporate route wasn't doing it for me. I had a family that I had to think of, and I was providing so much value and not getting it in return that just the sheer fact of I want to do this, really, it was so helpful to have people like you and some of the other people I mentioned to be able to say, dude, I was there. You're going to be fine. It's not that hard. just get out there and do it. And so in my head, I always knew I was going to, I mean, I started a business with my buddy in the backyard. We did a mini golf course and we cut out holes and we put empty tin
That's awesome.
cans in, and we put no mowing whatsoever. So like no putt putt whatsoever, but we put up signs around like our tiny small town in upstate New York. And my mom's just like, okay, that's, yeah, good luck, kid. But so I always knew I had it in me, right? But just having somebody to be like, it's not that hard. What you're thinking is right. You're better than most percent of the people that are doing this. Go nuts. Was really helpful for me.
Yeah, man. I thought of it this way, right? And COVID brushed us a little closer than I would have liked to with this. But I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I was like, what's the worst case scenario? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'd rather shoot for this than have the regret, right,
Yeah.
down the
Oh
road.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're all going to die at some point, and I don't know what
Yep.
people's religious backgrounds are, but in some capacity, I was like, if I didn't try and do this, like, what's the worst case scenario? I go back to doing what we're doing, right? You go back to corporate physical therapy and do what you're doing, right? Or figure something out. And I was like, and then of course COVID happened and stuff felt kind of hairy. But I think at
Yeah.
the same time, like, it was one of those aspects of like, I could always go back to doing something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, I again, I'm still writing the story, right, of my first year, and I have so many questions of, am I doing this right? Am I not? And because it's such a small sample size, just having somebody to bounce that off of when you've already made the terrifying jump of telling everybody you're quitting and starting your own thing. Well, what happens if nobody calls you in a few weeks? Do I keep spending money on ads? Do I drop everything and get a tent at the local race? How do I spend my time? So knowing that, I can talk to a few people to be like, hey, what do I do? What's this market like? What would you do? Was really, really nice.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I think you kind of touched on it, right? The last one that we spoke about was the confirmation of doing things correctly. And I
yeah.
think that's the piece where it's like, no, like you're getting confirmation on, yep, this is how I proceed. I wouldn't go in this direction. I would try this first. Here's how I would do this. And so if you have a roadmap as to how you can move, it
Hmm.
allows you to unlock certain levels. And I'm recognizing with that is certain mentorship helped me get to a certain level, then new mentorship helped me get to this level, the new mentorship helped, and I just kept kind of unlocking that aspect. And so I think here's the interesting part is I think that I heard this line from somebody, another guy that I would consider a mentor, though he's not really a direct mentor, but I
Yeah.
heard this line of, you want to try and find mentors that are a couple stages ahead of you, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to find, obviously if I called Elon Musk and was like, hey man, can you be my mentor? He'd be like, screw you, right? So you
Yeah.
want to find somebody like a tier or two above you that's
Yeah.
kind of like moving along, and that's a really good place to be, because in theory, or I don't even like saying above you because that sounds elitist. More like just ahead of where you're trying to go, because the
Yeah.
aspect of it is they've probably gone through that, they've blazed that trail. So in
Yeah.
essence, they can be like, hey, here's the stuff that I hit on the way. And they can kind of like
Yeah.
yell back to you. So it's
Yeah.
like the equivalent of like you're kind of like going through a jungle and they've got the machete.
Yeah.
But in reality, if they're smart, they're following somebody in front of them. And if the
Yeah.
person in front of them is smart, they're following. And so you're all kind of blazing a path together. You're just in a different time period. That's all.
Well, and that leads to the next kind of numbers question of like, well, how do you find that next one? Like, how do you know? Is it just, I don't know, his Instagram looks cool, or is it you get referred to him, or you start asking everyone you know, do you have a mentor? Like, because eventually you gotta get to a point. I mean, obviously, you with your Elon Musk example, there's only so many people at his level, right? But even just, I mean, how would somebody who maybe is a little farther along with me, but maybe wants to get to you, or maybe even farther ahead than you are with how many clinics or whatever, or different space model, whatever, how would you recommend somebody finds one, right? Is there, you just
Yeah,
hope
man.
and network or what?
I think it is. I really do. Like, I mean, for us, like, again, like if someone dropped us a comment here and was like, hey, can you help me? Or someone, sent us a message online, hey, can you help me? Like, the answer would be we would jump on a phone call and talk to them, right? And
Yeah.
like figure
Yeah.
out what makes sense. And so I think when it comes to that kind of aspect, that's exactly what we do. And so I think the concept of, mentorship is pretty simple. I think it's finding people just like this. I found one of my first two mentors just like this online.
Yeah.
Then reached out to them and started working with them, and realized they were just normal guys like me that are just a little further ahead of me in that path,
Yeah.
right? And now doing what we're doing, we're now trying to find other people to connect with and see how we can continue to move forward as well.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's also in different spaces, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've talked with chiropractors, athletic trainers, to personal trainers, to other business owners, right? So mentorships can come in all shapes and sizes, and different professions. So, kind of leave you with this is, I think that the aspect of mentorship, if people wanted to reach out to us and ask us for help, you just comment below, or DM us, or put any of your information. We can reach out to those people, because I think that type of networking and being open is what it takes to do that. If you reach the first olive branch, it makes it simple on us.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always happy to talk, always happy to work with people. In our show notes on Apple Podcasts and on our YouTube page, there is both of our websites are there. There's contact buttons. Just shoot us a text, shoot us an email, or even just comment on the platforms, and we'll be happy to help out. All right, Brian.
Cool.
So I think that's it for our time. I got a little. I'm gonna try and get an intro on this podcast. See if I'm
Yeah.
got my executive
Nice.
producer thing going.
I love it. Very nice. Very nice. Cool.
All right. So
All right.
those listening will know if I've succeeded.
Exactly. You'll know
All
before this
right.
actually comes in.
There
All
you
right.
go. All right. See you,
All right.
bud.
See you, man.